Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to present here at Buiatrics today. I'm going to be talking about a project that I did while I was the farm animal intern at the University of Nottingham, and it draws together some work that's also was being done at the University of Bristol, and it's great to be able to bring those two together. I'm starting my PhD at Bristol in September. Okay, so we're talking about injection site lesions. We'll start with what is an injection site lesion. So for this project, we took that to be a substance that had been introduced iatrogenically through the skin and into the subcutaneous tissues. And there's obviously different possible causes for that, but unless there was an obvious cause such as trauma, we took these lesions that we found in the muscles to be injection site lesions. Why does it matter? Well, I think we can all agree that that would look like quite a nice piece of steak there, were it not for the big scar tissue in the middle of it. So these lesions do have consequences for meat quality, and therefore they need to be trimmed from the carcass before that meat is put into for human consumption. So that therefore has consequences for economic loss, and when that was being looked at in the late 90s in the USA, the beef quality assurance training programs were introduced. It was estimated that over a 5-year period, these training programs they caused a saving of about $76 million over that 5-year period. So it's certainly not an insignificant issue. In terms of, perhaps even more importantly, that at a time when there's a lot of scrutiny on the food-producing industries in the world, that these lesions are also associated with pain and inflammation. So that's also another consideration for injection site lesions. So the objectives of this study were that we wanted to establish what the prevalence of injection site lesions in the UK beef cattle are, and then we wanted to bring it together with some work that we've done on vaccination practices and see whether we thought vaccination was playing a role in injection site lesion formation. So for the materials and methods, we had 4 abattoirs. We had two at both the slaughter line and both the cutting process. We had 2 points at which we used Food Standards Agency and slaughterhouse staff to observe for any injection site lesions. And these are staff that this is their normal everyday job, so they are part of the quality and control of producing beef in these abattoirs, so it is their job to find these lesions. The questionnaire was distributed online and in paper versions, and it asked farmers about their vaccination uptake, which vaccines they were using, and how and why they were using those vaccines. And we compared their responses to the data sheet recommendations to establish whether we thought that they were using those vaccines correctly or not. So in the abattoir, 2,853 carcasses were observed, and there were 117 injection site lesions found. So that was an prevalence of 4.1%. We then split them into small, medium, and large injection site lesions, and that was a little bit tricky to do because a lot of them were longitudinal lesions, so you could see, for example, where infection had followed the fascial planes. So we took the longest point of those lesions to establish the length. And you can see that we found 47% of lesions were found in the rump and 42% were found in the neck region of those animals. And we thought it was quite interesting that a lot of those lesions were chronic. So I think when we think about injection site lesions, we often think about abscesses or hemorrhage and active processes, but these were scar tissue and fibrosis for the most part. So that sort of told us that even when we're injecting animals as calves, we need to think about this because that can have consequences when they're slaughtered later on. So the questionnaire, we had 92 beef farmer respondents. In terms of their vaccination usage, we found that of those vaccines which were designed to be administered subcutaneously, 86% of those vaccines were being administered under the skin as directed in the datasheet. And similarly for the intramuscular vaccinations, 79% of those were being injected into the muscle. For the vaccines, 33% were administered in the rump and 60% were administered in the neck. And a lot of the data sheets don't actually specify a particular site of vaccination, but for those that did, we could establish that 72% of those were being administered in the correct site in the animal. So if we bring those two parts of the study together, again we found that 33% of vaccines are administered in the rump, but 47% of lesions are found there. And then in the neck, 60% of vaccines are administered there, and 42% of lesions were found there. So we weren't able to prove statistical significance with this, so we weren't able to prove that vaccinations are a cause of injection site lesions, but it is also worth noting that we did have quite small data numbers for that, so that could be a part of that. So in terms of the questionnaire, for us we wanted to know some of the reasons that we thought injection site lesions might be occurring. If it's not vaccination that's causing this, what are some of the other issues that could be involved? So I'll share with you some of the results that we got from the questionnaire. One of them we thought that could be important for the formation of injection site lesions is needle hygiene. So we asked farmers about what they were doing in terms of their needle hygiene. And most of the data sheets recommend to change the needle every few animals, usually around every 10 animals. But we can see that for the most part, even sort of the minimum isn't really being done. So a lot of farmers are only changing the needle when it's broken or blunt. I actually had a conversation with a farmer recently. He was very proud that his needle was now round, and I did point out to him that we could provide him with some new sharp ones. So if farmers aren't doing what is recommended on the data sheet, do they actually know what they should be doing? So we wanted to ask them what instructions they were following when it came to administering their vaccines. So we can see that there were a small majority that did look at the box or at the bottle, which is usually a condensed version of the data sheet. What really struck us from these results were that in terms of the vaccine supplier, very few people are actually having any sort of communication with the person who's supplying the vaccine, whether that's verbal instructions or written instructions. So that sort of pointed to us as an opportunity where we could intervene there. And so it's worth pointing out that in the UK, the majority of vaccination is carried out by farmers. I know that in other parts of the world that's not the case, and vets do a lot of the vaccination. But yeah, for the most part, it's farmers doing that in the UK. And when we asked them where they get their information with regards to vaccination, 90% of them said that they get it from their veterinary practice. So if you pair that up with the previous results saying that that people aren't really discussing their vaccination protocols with their vaccine supplier, to us that sort of said, well, there's a really big opportunity here for vets to get involved and to provide this information to farmers when they're purchasing their vaccines. So for the conclusions, we found that there was a 4.1% prevalence of injection site lesions in UK beef cattle. So in the year that the study was carried out, there were just under 3 million beef cattle slaughtered in the UK. So that equates to roughly 120,000 animals that were affected by injection site lesions. And I think when you put it in that context, you can see, again, that it's not an insignificant issue. We don't think that vaccinations are likely to be the major causes of injection site lesions in the UK, but that then begs the question, what is? So we think it would be worthwhile to do some more research on the different possible causes of injection site lesions, so whether we think it is needle hygiene that's the biggest problem, whether it's the adjuvants that the drugs are being administered in, whether it's the volume, and it would be really useful to know which of these are the most important factors. We did identify some compliance issues when it comes to administering vaccines, and these can be, they're likely to be able to be translated to other injectable products as well. So again, it would be useful to have an idea of what is the biggest factors when it comes to injection site lesion risk, again to target that to try and reduce the prevalence of injection site lesions. And then finally we found that we think that vets are very well placed to provide this information, whether that's with written instructions, so whether that's that we provide a handout when we're selling injectable products to farmers, or whether that's verbal communication. So I know that a lot of people are now including this sort of discussion in their herd health plans. They also have been, particularly in the UK, medicines courses run by veterinary practices, and people have been really pleasantly surprised at the uptake that they've had and the sort of enthusiasm from the farmers when it comes to discussing these products that they are administering on a daily basis. So I'd like to thank everybody who was involved with the project. And again, thank you for the opportunity to discuss it here today. If you'd like more information, I'd refer you to the full article that was published in the Vet Record in 2017. And I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody has.